Every relationship we enter carries more than chemistry and intention. It carries history. Our nervous systems, attachment patterns, and internal narratives are constantly at work beneath the surface, shaping how we interpret words, respond to conflict, and assign meaning to other people's actions. Research in neuroscience and trauma psychology shows that unprocessed trauma can significantly alter perception, emotional regulation, and trust. In fact, studies indicate that every relational trauma we experience early on influences how the brain assesses threat, safety, and belonging well into adulthood, often without our conscious awareness. So, when relationships feel hard, volatile, or confusing, the issue may not be the relationship itself, but the unexamined stories and survival strategies that we bring into it. Today's conversation is about making the invisible visible. It's about understanding how trauma shows up in human interaction, how it shapes what we believe about ourselves and others, and how awareness becomes the first step toward healthier, more intentional relationships. My guest today is amazing. Dr. Gino Collura is a seasoned behavioral scientist, executive advisor, and motivational speaker with a unique interdisciplinary expertise in neuroanthropology, which is a fusion of neuroscience, psychology, and biological and cultural anthropology. His work sits at the intersection of human behavior, leadership, and relational dynamics. He is a widely regarded, trusted advisor to C-suite leaders who are navigating complex internal and external relationships. And he helps individuals and organizations understand not just what is happening in their relationships, but why. And even that is amazing. But what's most amazing is that I get to call him my friend. Dr. Gino, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
Oh, Miss Nona, I've been looking forward to kicking 2026 off with this conversation right here. So I am doing amazing, amazing, amazing.
I'm just so glad that you joined because, as I've gotten to know you, your expertise is just incredible. And, you're a behavioral scientist and you have such deep expertise.
Thank
But I
you.
want to talk about trauma
Mm,
specifically
mm,
because what I have found is that it affects the way that people show up, not
mm,
just at the workplace, but in everyday relationships. And it really shows up in ways that people don't even understand, I think.
mm.
And so I would love for you to just maybe share your perspective as a behavioral scientist. How does trauma show up in ways that people may not realize are trauma driven?
110%. Such a great question and such an important question because there's a misconception about how it actually shows up every single day. Most people assume that trauma shows up as memories, right? Memories that kind of replay over and over and over again. And at the onset of trauma, that's one thing, right? But when we start looking about the longitudinal effects of trauma and what happens to quality of life, what happens to how it is that we regulate or dysregulate emotions and relationships and communication, more often than not, trauma is showing up as overreaction, withdrawal, control, or shutdown, right? And so if you think about those four different things, right? In the world of overreaction, right? Why would I overreact, right? Withdrawal. What is pushing me to step away from the situation? I feel that fear, right? Something is not settling right, and it's creating distance. It's creating space. Control, right? Control is often driven by fear, right? And so when you understand where that need comes from and you can tie it back to whatever that traumatic event or events were, right? That's an important thing. And then also shut down, right?
Mhm.
Our system, and we'll kick the conversation off kind of taking a deep dive on this. You have what's called the HPA axis. It's your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and your adrenal glands, right? Your HPA axis is vital in regulating your stress response system. So fight or flight, that whole thing. Well,
Mhm.
studies have shown year after year, decade after decade, when that HPA axis becomes dysregulated because of traumatic events that you've experienced, your ability to have emotional control and stability in your life gets rocked.
Mhm.
Right. And so every decision you make, every word that you speak, how you choose to listen, if you're intentional about being present or not, it's always rooted back to some form of trauma, right, that you've experienced.
So this is fascinating to me because most people, what happens is, let's take overreaction as an example.
Hmm.
Most people really look at the other person and they're like, well, I
Hmm.
overreacted because of what you did, or
Hmm.
my action was really because of what you did. And I think what
Hmm.
you're saying is we kind of need to pause for a minute
Yeah.
and really do some self-reflection and introspection. And to that point, I'm curious, how do our earliest experiences contribute to the
Mm-hmm.
beliefs that we maybe carry about ourselves into adulthood that end up expressing themselves in the
Hmm.
ways that you just shared?
Whew. All right. So there's a lot here, okay, on this, right? And so this is a really important thing that I want everyone who's tuning in to really sink their teeth in on. And it's this, it's right. So the people who loved us first taught us the cost of love. Right now, what
Mm,
do I mean by that? Right? If the love that you felt as a child and growing up or into adolescence, even early adulthood, right? If it's inconsistent, right, or if it's conditional, or if it doesn't feel safe, that becomes your wiring, right? As far as what is normal, what is your homeostatic baseline, right? And so now
mhm,
that becomes the expectation, right? That the expectation in somebody else is to provide, right? That field of sorts of how it is the emotional continuum is going to represent itself in your life. The challenge with that is the brain doesn't like different, right? It
mm,
seeks different. It's intrigued by different. But when it comes to actually settling down and getting into the day in, day out operations of how I build my own subculture as a person and in my family, and my relationships that I have professionally and personally, that baseline that's created, you have to challenge it all the time. And that is where the biggest point of adversity comes into play for most of us, right? How can I effectively challenge that and be comfortable with being uncomfortable? Because it absolutely creates this notion of looking at myself in the mirror and saying, man, why? Why am I
mm,
responding? Why am I reacting this way? What is it that provided that blueprint for me with my first initial interactions with love? And when someone says I love you, that's fine, but who is that person and what have they, or what are the quality and depth of the seeds that they have planted in my mind and in my heart with what I'm supposed to think good and healthy love feels like? And you have to
mm.
question where your perception as an adult, where does that love pattern come from?
Something you said, it's like it did something to me. You said that our earliest experiences taught us the cost
Hmm.
of love.
Hmm.
Man, that is that is profound.
Hmm.
And I do think that some of us, and I'm one of the us that I'm referencing, I think that because we were taught that love had a high cost,
Hmm.
um, that it conditioned us to in some ways think that we may not be able to pay the cost. Like you work and you work and you
Mhm,
try to make it happen, you try to make it work, and then there comes a point where you just get exhausted. You get
mhm,
exhausted. And it's interesting. I'm curious if you've ever had cases. I mean, you've had so many, but cases of people who are very successful, and this isn't even in my notes as a
yeah,
question, but
well,
people who are very successful, who have been chasing success almost as a proxy for love.
mhm.
Have you had any experiences like that? I'd love if you could just share a little bit more about that.
I will tell you that is the majority of folks that I work with, right?
Hmm.
And let me preface this with, in the world of working with highly successful C-suite individuals, right? The drive, what's driving them, right, to have validation
Mm,
and fulfillment, and what makes sense inside to make themselves feel good about who they are, about feel good about what they have accomplished. 9 times out of 10, right, there is some link to some sort of trauma or gap or deprivation of love,
mhm,
right, in their life that is driving that part of their identity to seek that validation that they are good enough, right? And that's powerful, right? Like when you really start to wrap your mind, whether it's someone that you're dealing with in an executive boardroom or if it's your next door neighbor, it doesn't matter, right? We're all living the same human condition, the same human experience as far as being blessed with a mind and a heart and a spirit. So in that realm, right, to your point, Nona, that is a huge thing, right? When you're looking at what is the driving catalyst to be able to, for lack of a better term, backfill what wasn't there, to try and seek, right, that positivity, to seek that fulfillment, that is a huge factor. Huge factor.
mm. Yeah, that did something to me, and I think for those who are watching and listening, I have so many people in my audience who are very successful, many people
Mhm,
who, kind of are in that, like, hustle culture mentality,
mhm,
trying to
mhm,
make it, crank it out, grind it out,
mhm.
and at some point, we have to ask ourselves, "What is the why behind how I'm showing up?" Like,
That's
why
real.
is it
Yeah.
that I feel like I just finished an interview actually where I was sharing the story of a friend of mine. I had lunch
Mm,
with him a few years ago, and he's brilliant, very talented
mhm,
actor.
mhm,
He's in theater. He's amazing. And he made a statement to me over dinner that kind of caught me off guard because I was asking him, hey, so catch me up on life. And he said something to the effect of, he wants to see his name in lights. And
mm,
that's what he said. Like, and I was just like, oh,
mhm,
really? I said, okay. I said, well,
mm,
why? He was like, I don't know. I just want to see my name in lights. And as
yeah,
I was driving home that night, it's like it hit
mm,
me that for him, name and lights
mhm.
means I matter,
That's right.
And I
That's right.
think so many of us may not realize it, but what we're actually aspiring to is really to matter, but we're
Right.
using all of these other things as proxies. So
Oh,
I'm just sorry for
so
the
well
the, the
said.
tangent there, but I just felt that in my spirit. I'm like, I think there are people out there that really need to hear that point.
No,
So
but and I
go
agree.
ahead.
It's a very good point. It's a very important point. Because look, in a day and age, right, where listen, narcissistic culture is a staple, right, with what it is that we do and how we do things nowadays.
Yeah.
And in the world, and well, in a sea of being able to figure out where do I fit, right? What
Mhm.
value do I bring, right? What is the validation that is necessary for me to feel like I belong? You are seeing
Mhm.
massive gaps, and this is something that I talk about in my book as well. It's we live in a state and a time of connected disconnection. We are more
Oof.
connected to one another than ever before. Like technology has done an amazing job at connecting us, but our hearts and our minds
Mhm.
and our spirits are more disconnected than we have ever been, ever,
Yeah.
right? And you see that statistically, that's validated very easily, right?
Mhm.
But more importantly, from one human being to another, when you feel and you feel that because when you are dialed in and you're willing to make the hard choice every day to look at yourself in the mirror and question your why, when you are around people, right, who are not there and they're not doing, and you want them and you want to encourage them to kind of start beginning that path, that journey to get to that place, you
Mhm.
recognize it and you realize just how misguided, right, so many folks are, and they think they're chasing all the right things for the right reasons, and it's just not the case because they get to that pinnacle, and when they get there, it's nothing
Mhm.
like they thought it would be.
Ooh, boy. You get to the pinnacle and you just realize you're alone and it's cold.
Spot on. Spot
And it's
on,
like,
Nona, spot on.
man, I thought the prize was up here, but the only thing
Yes,
that's up here is loneliness and cold.
that's real. Yes.
Um, I think people tend to think that trauma is it's like in the extreme events, like the
Mm,
big things.
mhm,
But in your work, how have you maybe seen trauma in the context of relational dynamics and just how
mhm.
people interact?
Yeah. So the thing about trauma is this, right? So trauma, there's a huge focus on the trauma itself, right?
Yeah.
Instead of what happened or what's happening inside you as a result of that trauma, right? And so
Mm,
in my world, there's three things, right? Your safety, right? Your ability to be seen, right? And your ability to feel protected. When
mhm,
those three things are violated, right, you begin to enter into a world of ambiguity. Now, if there's one thing from a neuroscience perspective that your brain does not like more than anything else, it's being
mhm,
in a state of ambiguity, not knowing, right? And that's why for us, like, faith is so important, right? Because that
mhm,
substance of hope gives us the solidarity to continue to take that one step forward each day, right? We have that direction because we have that guidance and that leadership in Him. But the moment that connection with another becomes dangerous, right? And I
mm,
continue to nurture that connection because I feel like that's what I should do. Whew! You start putting
mhm,
pedal to the metal on that, right? As far as your ability to discern and make sense, as far as where does God want me? And then also, where is it that I belong? Because when you start putting
mhm,
someone else's need, right, for connection in front of yours, because if that connection is not healthy and it's trauma driven, but yet you feel like you're hostage to it, which I cannot tell you how many folks experience this on a regular basis, you really put yourself in a position where your ability to show up for yourself, your ability to be present, to make the right decisions on what needs to be done for you becomes completely challenged.
Hmm. So, one thing I'm thinking about now is there was a situation I had on my job, maybe like, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago. And had a boss who, he was an interesting character. He
Mhm,
was one of those people that could lead up really well.
mhm,
He interacted really well with higher ups. They loved him. He even, I think, led across really well. And to some extent, he led down well,
mm,
but only if it was somebody who basically just did what he wanted. Now,
okay,
I'm the kind of person, and both my virtue and my vice is that I've always been the kind of person that I had no problem speaking truth to power. Like,
mhm,
I was never the one to kinda, like, go along to get along type.
right,
So if I saw something that was wrong, I would say something, and
mhm,
that endeared me to some people, and it made other people not like me.
sure,
Well, there was a situation where we were going through our budgeting process, and I needed to get some more headcount for a big initiative that I was leading.
mhm,
And this boss told me that he couldn't do it. He told me to even go to our product colleagues and see if I can get headcount from them, which was like unheard of. Like, you go
mhm,
to other teams to get their headcount, like that was unheard
right,
of.
right,
But, because I had a good relationship with, some folks on the product team, they were willing to actually give up a couple headcount, which again
mm,
was unheard of.
yeah,
Well, I get the headcount, it's in the budget, and he comes back to me and he was angry, and he said I should have, included him in that process. Like, I should
mm,
not have just gone to get the head count, and I was so confused because I was like, "But you said to go." So there was that piece, but then about, I don't know, a month and a half later, he ended up taking the head count from me, and he said, "Oh, well, it was just a business decision."
mm,
And I remember, in the meeting with him, I was just like, "What?" Because I was
mhm,
upset. And
mhm,
he was like, "Well, you shouldn't be upset because it's just a business decision."
mm,
And, I gotta tell you, Gino, I let him know exactly how I felt. I've never
mhm,
been one to use profanity, but
mhm,
I have a very large vocabulary, and
mhm,
so I always tell people I can cuss you out without using profanity. And
mhm,
so I I definitely told him exactly how I felt.
mhm,
And after the fact, part of me, I felt bad
mm,
because I could tell that I had hurt him.
mm,
And I often wondered, I was like, how do you hold the tension
mm,
between doing what is right
mhm,
and hurting someone who's actually hurting you? You know,
mhm,
it's complex. But I was just curious if you have any thoughts on that. Like, how do you stand your ground,
mhm,
but you're also afraid of hurting the person who's hurting you? And it
mhm,
feels like there's something there. I would love for
mhm.
you to help me unpack that.
No, that is so it's a skilled question, right? And what I mean by that is not everyone has the discernment to be able to figure out that line, right, that exists between those
Mhm.
two different areas, right? And what do I mean by that? Even presenting the notion that you can do that, right? It shows
Mhm.
depth on your end, Nona, right? Like kudos to you on that. Now, where do you find the balance in that, right? Because here's the
Mhm.
thing, you do have a right and you should express how you feel. And at the same
Mhm.
time, when you are a compassionate and empathetic person, you also recognize that you're dealing with a human being that very clearly has elements and gaps within their communication and emotional regulation that's broken. Here's the flip side
Mhm.
of this, though, right? As a believer, we are called to love everyone, right? But at the
Mhm.
same time, it's not our job to protect everyone, right? And so, what do I
Oof.
mean by that, right? When you are going through something and you need to establish a boundary for you in order for you to continue to walk in his path and in his light, listen, Christ flipped tables. He yelled, right? So, like, people forget this, right? Like, it's not all
Mhm.
sunshine and rainbows, and I just have to swallow all of it and take all of it. No, right? Like,
Mm.
you have to have a level of self respect, right? And it doesn't mean, and
Mhm.
you said it beautifully, by the way, you can let someone know how you feel about them without having to use profanity, right? And again, that's why I
Mhm.
said it's skillful, right? That does take skill and it does take a level of understanding of your emotional temperance to say exactly what you want to say without having to utilize those 5, 6, 7 words that exist, right, in the dictionary that are not the best of words. But I will say, where is the fine line when it comes to that? And what I will tell you is this: anytime you are compromising your emotional well-being, your spiritual well-being, your physical well-being, and the only way to get out of it is to establish a boundary. Establish the boundary. Like,
Mm,
period, establish the
that's
boundary.
good.
How
Mhm.
wherever the chips fall, that's not your responsibility, right? Your responsibility first and foremost is to treat all of you like the temple that it is. And that includes
Mhm.
what you're receiving from others. That's going to, especially folks that are coming from a leadership perspective, right? Like, and this is another thing people often forget. Very simply stated, what is the definition of leadership? It's someone's ability to influence somebody else to achieve a common objective or goal.
That's
Your
good.
ability to influence is defined by how well you connect to me. If you're not interested in connecting with me, I'm not interested in following your leadership, right? And so in your situation, he wasn't interested in leading, right? What he or she was interested in was following, right? Whatever it is that they wanted to do at that moment in time. And I made this decision because it was a business decision. Come on, we all
Mhm.
know what that actually is, right? But it's not
Yeah.
your job to protect him, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense. Thank you for that therapy session. I needed that.
I'm here
I,
all day for you, Nona. I'm here all day.
Man, that was therapeutic for me. Um, so thinking about just relational patterns,
Yeah.
I would love if you could highlight what are maybe some just dysfunctional relational patterns
Mm,
that could potentially be rooted in unresolved trauma. And I think you highlighted some of them at the beginning, but I would love to go a little bit deeper because I mean there may be some people I have found that people are very quick to excuse
mm,
the way that they show up. They're quick to even excuse the way other people show up
mhm,
because it makes them uncomfortable. So what are some
mm.
dysfunctional relational patterns that people should be paying attention to?
I think one of the biggest ones that I see quite often, right, is people pleasing, right? And this kind of goes to what you
Mm,
and I were talking about before, right? I mean, look, anytime that you interpret that there is love in a relationship, and by the way, this could be intimate or amicable, right? Whatever. But the
mhm.
idea that there's a sense of belonging and feeling safe and being protected, because you can have shades of that. But then at the same time, you can have massive doses of trauma and abuse that come along with it as well, right? This is what
Yeah.
feeds Stockholm syndrome, right? And folks that
Mhm.
stay in abusive relationships and they shouldn't be there in the first place.
Mhm.
But there's this notion of I don't want to lose the if 10% of this is good, I don't want to lose that. Even though 90% of it's
Oof.
horrible, that 10% I'm going to hold on to because my gosh, I'm so afraid, again, ambiguity.
Wow.
I'm so afraid of what else is going to be out there for me. What if this is it? This is the best that I get and this is what I
Mm.
deserve. And that's all a lie. That's all manipulation, right? That's the enemy doing what the enemy does best, right? So having that wherewithal
Mhm.
to understand again, establish boundaries, know your self-worth, very important. Another thing that comes up in these sorts of situations, right, is conflict avoidance in general. Not wanting to have a direct and honest discussion because it requires confidence. Right? And this is
Yeah.
this is something that is a really big deal because we are seeing less and less confidence in folks nowadays, right? And I think people need to know, like, when we're talking about confidence, we're not talking about self-righteousness, right? What we're talking about here is literally, and you break down confidence, confidelis, right? The Latin prefix suffix, right? With faith, right? With faith in what? Well, with faith in yourself. Well, what is faith? Faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Mhm.
What is the substance of things you are hopeful for within yourself that have been put on your heart and you've been convicted of? If you're not paying attention to that and you're not listening to that will, then you're going to continue to go through these patterns, right? Because they're cyclical in nature, right? So people pleasing,
Mhm.
conflict avoidance, and then emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal is a really, really big one too, right?
Mhm.
And the idea of I'm checking the box and I'm here. Yeah, but you're not. Right? Like you check the box and I see you, right? But you're not actually here. Right. And that is it's a very big shame, especially when you start talking about the ripple effects of relationships and other people involved, i.e., children, right, or other loved ones, and they start feeling the impact, right? Or even those that you lead, right? Folks that are on your team professionally. How that plays out is a very real thing because it also shows what are you willing to tolerate or not for yourself. If you are showing up just to check the box, how much do you actually care?
So I feel like for me, the
Mhm.
people pleasing piece
Mhm. Mhm.
has been huge.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's been one of those that of course I know it's rooted in childhood experiences. And again, that idea of just how much love is gonna cost me, ooh, that thing really hit me, I think, because of that. But the idea that you said about, man, 10%, I gotta the 10% is good, the 90% is horrible, but the 10% that's good, I gotta hang on to it because
Mhm.
I may not deserve more.
Mhm.
Whoo, I may not
Mhm.
find better. Like,
Mhm.
that's actually a mind trip. But I
Mhm.
know so many
Mhm.
people go through that.
Yes.
I've talked to people who are in horrible situations, but
Mhm.
they can't imagine that they're worthy of better
Right.
or more. How would you coach someone who
Mhm.
has that mentality? Like,
Mhm.
I gotta hang on to this
Mhm.
because I may not be worthy of better or more.
So that's it's a huge thing, right? And what folks don't realize is when you go through a process like that and you live that life, you are blocking intimacy. Right now, what do I mean by that?
Mm.
You're blocking intimacy, the kind of intimacy that God seeks to have with you. I'm not talking about human to
Mhm.
human intimacy. I'm talking about the intimacy that actually matters, right? In your
Yeah.
identity, right? So, where do we start with that? Well, you have to be open to the possibilities of what could be for your life. If what you think the totality of your life is what you've constructed in your mind, and it's very limiting, we have to break that, right? That is what we call a
Mhm.
closed loop, right? In the world of neuroscience, we have to shift that closed loop into an open loop. What does that demand of you? What does it require? What's step one? Step one is in every situation where emotions are involved, right, with the person that you're sharing a relationship with, make the harder choice. When you are
Mm.
presented with two options, the easy one, which is what you always do, because if not, you wouldn't do it, or the hard one. Always pick the hard one,
Mhm.
right? And what does that demand of you? Demands discipline, right? It demands showing up for nobody else than yourself. You were made in his likeness and his image. Don't forget that, right? There's power within you that the helper provides through the Holy Spirit. We forget that on a very regular basis because we're like, we got this. I got a plan. I'm going to figure it out. I'm strong. I'm confident. I'm intelligent. I got this. No,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be that complicated, and it starts with baby steps, and the very first baby step is start making harder choices, right? And so when
Gosh.
presented with those 2, make the harder choice.
Who make the hard choice? And that is with, I think, any change that we want to make.
Mm,
It starts with making the hard choice
right.
because I think your point you made is so true is the easy choice is what we've always done,
That's
even
right.
if the easy choice is the painful choice. It's
100%.
because that's what we're familiar with, that's what
That's
we've
right.
known. But if we want to change, it starts by making the hard choice.
Always.
This is good. This is
Always.
rich. I want
Always.
to talk a bit about your book, The 7 Layers of Successful
Yes.
Relationships. And I would love for you to even share what made you write that
Mm.
book? What kind of prompted it? And then I'd love to hear just your thoughts on some of the most important takeaways that people can apply.
All right, so this is a unique story, right? As far as like how it is that writing the book came into fruition in the first place. So
Mhm.
my wife and I had trouble with becoming pregnant and getting pregnant, right, with our firstborn child, right? So when we were blessed with a child, it was in the midst of COVID, right? And so
Mm.
everything's locked down, everything's shut down. She's a nurse by trade, by profession, right? So she was exposed to very high risk situations, and we made the decision collectively for her to stay at home during the pregnancy, right? And in that time, I'm thinking to myself, legacy matters to me in the biggest of ways, right? And not the material sense of leaving an empire, right? It's not that. It's what could I leave my daughter, right? If something happened to
Mhm.
me tomorrow, because none of us know, right, when our time's going to get called and we're going to go home, right? So
Yeah.
I think I think a book teaching her about people and starting with
Mhm.
herself, right? She's always, I don't care what regarded as human beings, right? We're tribal, we're communal. You're always going to have relationships, and they always present the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in any continuum of life. So to be able to pick up some fundamental layers that starts with personal mastery and self mastery, that is an invaluable skill set that will serve her in the entirety of her life. So literally, Nona, I wrote the book as a legacy piece for my daughter before she was born. And I had no intention or like no thought whatsoever that it would later be adopted by the US military and several different
Wow.
corporations, right, throughout the country. So, but for me, it was what is something that I can leave her, right? If I am not on this earth anymore, what could I leave that could teach her, right, on how to
Mhm.
navigate life and life's adversities? And truly, that is where the book came from.
Wow. I think it's first of all, it's amazing that you have literally left in writing a legacy piece for your daughter. Like
Mhm.
That just does something to me because, so I lost my dad when he was actually only 36. I was not even quite 2 yet.
No, no.
And I don't have anything tangible from him. I have a few
Mm,
pictures of us together,
mhm,
but, one thing I know for sure, and everyone has told me this, that my father loved me and he
mm,
wanted me, and just that knowledge
mhm,
alone has
mhm,
been healing to me, and so the fact that your daughter not only knows that, but she has this
mhm,
tangible, artifact
mhm,
is just incredible. So I
mm.
wanna say on behalf of all daughters of the world, thank you, dad.
Well, hey, that fills my cup, so thank you. She just turned 5, so she can't articulate it yet, but hearing that
Oh,
from you means a
man.
lot.
No, that's amazing. I
Yeah.
would love for you to share, what would you say because even the metaphor of layers
Mhm,
of relationships means that it's not something that is simply, what's the word? It's not like a one container, one size fits all. Like,
mhm.
there are different layers to it, which means that they're building on top of each other. So,
That's right.
can you just give us a little insight into what are some of the most important layers of a successful relationship, that
100%.
may be missing, some of the ones that are
Yes.
often missing from
Yes.
relationships.
Right. So and you hit and spot on, right? So if you think of a scaffold, right? And the way in which the book
Mhm.
was designed and relationships are designed in general, right? They are there's a lot of connective tissue, right, in between each of
Yeah.
those layers. And the base layer, right, is the relationship you have with yourself. This is chapter 1, right? And
Mhm.
the one thing that matters the most in that entire baseline is the quality and depth of relationship you have with yourself will always define the quality and depth of relationship you could have with somebody else, right? And what do I
Mhm.
mean by that? If you don't understand that why, if you don't understand what the traumatic things did to your heart and to your mind at a biological level and at an emotional and a spiritual level, you're missing pieces. And somewhere along the line, when you are seeking that connectivity with others, those pieces that are missing are going to show up, right? And you're not going to know
Mm.
what to do with them because they're going to be very unfamiliar to you. And that
Yeah.
generates that level of ambiguity, right? That starts to create this sense of danger or overcompensation or people pleasing, all the things, right, that come along with it. So that baseline is having a very clear dial in, right, on you. Now, when you start to expand, right, the other components in the different layers, look, something that is really, really big, right, is listening, right? And what do I mean by that? Listening to what it is that your heart is telling you and actually having the courage to act on it.
Mm.
Far too often, you see so many people nowadays, their heart is saying one thing, but the social pressure is forcing and pushing them to do something else because they seek acceptance over happiness, but true happiness
Oof.
within themselves. So if I'm
Mm.
constantly on that treadmill of seeking acceptance and approval by other people, right? Our value system is completely misaligned, right? Like
Mm.
the way in which we were designed, the way in which God created us, it's to seek Him and to please Him and His will, not to do
Mm.
that for one another for validation. To do that through service, that's one thing, but for validation, that's a different story, right? So having a very clear alignment of what that means and how that works is an important thing. And then look, values. Like
Yeah.
I cannot tell you, no, 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 this is an exercise, and I encourage everyone tuning in to do this. If you've never written your own personal constitution, what
Mm.
defines you, right? And this isn't a mission statement. This isn't a value statement either, right? A personal constitution where if I were to read it and by the time I get done with it, it's going to tell me everything of what you stand for, what you believe in, and why, right? And what's acceptable and what's not. That's where you start. This is an exercise I've been doing for 12 to 14 years, right? If you go into one of my other offices, you will see them in frames across the entire wall, right? And you will be amazed at year by year, you will see fundamental things that stick, but you will also see the shifts and the changes, right? And who I am as a person. You want to talk about a legacy piece as well to leave, right? When you're no longer walking this earth, right? To how it is that you define you and for your children and loved ones to see that and embody that, it's an incredibly powerful thing. So that was a mouthful. So all that to be said, right? That baseline though always starts with you and getting a very clear understanding of who you are and what God has put on your heart for what he wants you to do with the time you have on this earth.
That is so profound because we oftentimes think that successful relationships simply require us to understand the other person,
Mm,
but what you're saying is quite literally the most important part of a successful relationship starts with you understanding yourself. And that's
Facts.
the part that we skip over as quickly as possible. And
Right.
even when situations are trying to get us to confront ourselves, when things aren't working out
Mhm.
the way that we had hoped, or people are giving us feedback that we don't necessarily like, instead of us
Mhm.
being contemplative and actually
That's
thinking,
right.
well, what is this saying? We do our best to avoid it. And
That's
so
right.
thank you for sharing that. And I
Absolutely.
encourage everybody to pick up that book because self awareness
Mhm.
is literally the foundation of a successful relationship.
100%.
Um, I want to ask you this question
Yes.
as we close, because I think you've seen so much in your work with so many different people, and you've
Mhm.
worked with trauma of all types. But
Mhm.
what is actually giving you hope when it
Mm.
comes to people healing and growing and learning to relate differently? What gives you hope?
That's a really good question, and it's something that I think about a lot, right? And especially in the work that I do with the human brain, right? So
Mhm.
when you understand the intricacies of the human brain, you understand that the brain, contrary to beliefs back in the 30s and like 30, 40 years ago, right? Our brain is literally designed to rewire on a regular basis, right? It's
Mhm.
malleable, right? We have what's called neuroplasticity, right? And that used to be a really big catch buzzword. A lot of people don't quite understand what that means. And all it means is that your brain is always open to possibilities. It's just a
Mm.
question if you have the discipline, right, to seek those possibilities and commit to them. The difference with this, though, is that the brain is designed to rewire, but the heart is always designed to heal, right? The heart is designed to restore, right? God blessed us with an incredible skill set to have redemption, right? And that is completely expressed through the love of the sacrifice of his son, Jesus Christ, right? So knowing that God is in the business of restoration, knowing that the heart is designed to heal and the brain is designed to rewire, for me, it is a complete commitment to letting people know that nobody is broken beyond repair.
Mm.
Everybody, when you're wounded, right? And all of us at some point in life, we become wounded. It's part of being a human being, right? But the thing about wounds is that they can heal. And when you believe that they can heal and you have faith that they can heal, then you start seeking the answers in the right places. But when you start to feel hopelessness and you start to feel like there's no other answer and you start to feel confused and you're lost, that is where, for my work, coming in and being able to say, time out, right? Let's look at the scientific facts and let's look at the spiritual facts and let's bring them
Mhm.
together, right? And let's build that bridge to close that gap.
I'm just First of all, the fact that you even said hearts can heal,
Mhm.
minds can rewire,
Mhm.
that is to me such a powerful revelation because we do tend to think that either we or someone else that we're just beyond repair.
That's right.
The damage is done. There's nothing that can be done to fix it. But you, I think, have not only given us hope in terms of the science, but in terms of just the spirit of God. The word
Mhm.
tells us, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Right. That's right.
And for that to happen, it has to be possible. God wouldn't say it
Mhm.
unless it was possible that our mind could be
Mhm.
renewed. So,
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining me today, for
Oh,
joining all of us
absolutely.
today. I think that what you've really shared is hope about the fact that awareness, it's not about blame. Self awareness is
Mhm.
not about blame.
Mhm.
It's really about creating the conditions for freedom.
That's right.
And there's a scripture that I want to leave everybody with on it's Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, which tells us, above all else, guard your heart, for
Mhm.
everything you do flows from it.
That's right.
But the beautiful thing that you have said is that even if what's flowing from our heart right now might be toxic waters, we
Mhm.
have the power to heal
That's
so
right.
that good, sweet water flows from our heart. So
Mhm.
I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation today. And just remember that our relationships flow from what's happening beneath the surface. It's never just what we see, it's never just what we experience. And when we allow our hearts to heal, when we allow our minds to rewire, transformation follows. And so, as
Mhm.
always, if nobody has told you this today, please know God loves you, and I do too. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining.